How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord, mighty God, Lord of all. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord, mighty God, Lord of all. Even the lowly sparrow finds a home for her brood, and the swallow a nest for herself where she may lay her young. In your altars, my King and my God, how lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord, mighty God, Lord of all. Blessed are they whose dwelling is your own, Lord of peace. Blessed are they, refreshed by springs and by rain, when dryness daunts and scathes. Behold my shield, my King and my God. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord, mighty God, Lord of all. I would forsake 1,000 other days anywhere, if I could spend one day in your courts, belong to you alone. My strength are you alone, my glory, my King and my God. Dwelling place, O Lord, mighty God, Lord of all.
Climbing walls and staying in the walls and staying among the walls. So when they stay in the walls, you can say that they are circumference people. They do not go further. And the mistake I said is, when you begin to see that that is all that there is to life. Now, Saint Teresa calls the first three mansions, Mansion 1, Mansion 2, and Mansion 3, the ascetical mansions. These are the mansions wherein she would describe, as we would put it in today's lingo, she would describe people whose main task is ego work. Ego work. Whereas those from the 4th to the 7th mansion have another task, which is soul work. Soul work. Now, I will continue. I will take that more in detail as we go along. Now, ego work. Ego work. Now, when you look at ego work, it means the person is at that stage wherein the mode of relating is according primarily to the needs of the ego. Now, how is the ego spotted? Easy. what is the most characteristic trait of the ego? Fear. Fear. Because fear becomes the driving motivation of a person who is centered on self. Fear because baka kukunin ang nasa kanya. Fear because ano kahit sasabihin niya. Fear because, naku baka mawala ang content na sa akin. This is ego work. Now, do you know that faith and fear have the same definition? Faith? How do you define faith? It is a strong conviction of something I cannot see. Faith is I have a strong conviction for what I cannot see. That's faith. Fear has the same definition. Strong conviction for what I cannot see. You will say, my white lady talaga. Talaga, my white lady nga. Because you have such a strong conviction, it creates it. Now, what is the difference? The difference is the possibility. Faith sees blessing possibility. Fear sees disaster possibilities. What makes them different are the possibilities. And that is why Jesus would always say, do not fear. I am with you. Do not fear. It is I. Be not afraid. How many times does our good Lord repeat, do not be afraid. Do not fear. Why are you afraid? Nakatingin ka sa sarili mo eh. Your world is centered on yourself. No wonder we are afraid. Now, that is why, when you look then at faith is evidence of grace. That is why I see blessing in every possibility. There is possibility for blessing everywhere. Doon mo malalaman, yung tao ay may pananampalataya, may pananalig sa Diyos. Because, may blessing yan. May blessing yan kahit ganyan. May mangyaring maganda. This person has faith. Strong conviction on what they cannot yet see. Pero kung ang tao, anak ko, malas talaga yan. May nangyari talagang masama. This is fear. It does not become a possibility for grace. It becomes an evidence for pain. I am working on past pain. Ay, may mangyaring masama. May mangyayaring masama. This is fear. So, that is why we ask ourselves, at this stage in your life, at this stage in my life, is your belief in God so strong that you can say that in everything God will work for you? Romans 8. I can say in everything God will bring out good. I can say that with conviction. Quiet, simple conviction. God will work out good out of this. Or is our main motivation fear? Where we see ghosts in all its forms, ghosts in ourselves, everywhere. So that is why when we look then at the mansions, you will see that in the first 3 mansions, people are basically living out of the motivation of fear. Fear na maimpyerno. Fear na magabaan. Fear that is one. It's all fear. But you will see, the person seems to be practicing a certain kind of religion, but it is basically one of fear. It is basically one that has not yet let go of this mindset. So that is why, when we look then at the first mansions, when you look at the first mansions, you will see that St. Teresa starts in the first dwelling places, number 1. I said this morning, we have magnificent beauty and we have marvelous capacity. And then in number 2 of that same chapter, she says, it is a shame and unfortunate that through our own fault, we don't understand ourselves, or we do not know who we are. Therefore, she will say then that one thing is necessary at the end of number 4 of that same paragraph, that we should not put a limit to the works of God. In other words, I have to believe. Unless I start with faith, there is no point in continuing the journey. Now you will see that at the end of number 4 of chapter 1 of the first dwelling places. No? So you will see that it is a very important thing. I know that whoever does not believe in these favors will have no experience of them, for God does not like us to put a limit on His works. So, one of the best ways we can honor God is to trust that God is generous. Whether you belong to you are Confucianist or you're Taoist, these are universal principles that are used by mystics of all faiths in order to help us to understand what to expect. So, this morning, I ended up by giving you 7 precious principles as steps and stages. To review, we said, number 1, the ego has to be deconstructed. It cannot be that the ego remains the same. It has to be hit, it has to be polished, it has to be tamed. Use any word, purified, it has to be cleansed, so that you may be able to go on the journey. We've said that, no? So that is a universal principle. Another universal principle that we mentioned, I will go to the last, that as you journey on, you begin to see your world becomes wider. Your perspective becomes bigger. You are more broad-minded, not in the loose sense of the word, but in the beautiful sense of the word. You see things from a new perspective. So, you have 7 principles I mentioned this morning. No? So first, the ego is deconstructed. Second, we start usually with outer authority, and then we begin to see it calls forth an inner authority. That means you become a discerning person. Discernment, unfortunately, is a rare commodity, even among us who are supposed to be prayerful. Prayer and discernment are usually sisters. So if our prayer does not include discernment, that means there are some things we might need to re-look again. There are some things we need to reconsider. There are some things we need to see more clearly. So that is inner authority, discernment. I discern. And you do not discern for somebody else. You discern for yourself what needs to be done at this concrete situation. This, I give the name, the sensus animarum, if you remember, from some of the exercises I give. We might go to this also briefly. Now, the third principle that we mentioned is this. We begin to realize that religion is basically connecting all the parts to the whole. That's the third principle. Everything belongs. Now, you will see, as a person grows in the spiritual life, you begin to see that everything is grace. Now, you will see, can a financial disaster be called grace? It's hard to say.
Like Detroit.
Can you call an accident a grace? Well, as I said, we need new eyes to be able to look at things that way. But it is always 20/20 vision. Hindsight. That is why when you're in a dark night, you can never say it's a grace. You will say many times, ano ba tong buwisit na to? What is happening to me? Well, only later on, as you look back, 20/20 vision, and you will say, okay, I have grown through it. I begin to see it is grace. What do you mean? I can see the face of Christ even in my pain. Then it has become healed memory. That is what John of the Cross tells us about the healing of memories. Lahat po tayo may mga painful memories. All of us have hurt memories, experiences we would rather not talk about, we would rather not remember. But then you will see that as we look and we grow, we will see that Christ begins to show His face in those very experiences. That is a sign of growth. That is a general principle. As you grow, you will see, ay nako, lahat pala mosaic. Parts of a beautiful picture. Therefore, I dare not reject anything, or else my mosaic will never be complete. Remember, when we give ourselves to God, we give ourselves completely. Now, you will say, I don't like this part, this one I want to get rid of. This one, no, this doesn't fit. Do not judge the wheat and the weeds. That's none of our business. We continue. At the end, He will say which is which. Third principle po yan, everything belongs. Everything is part of the picture. The fourth, we were talking about, you have to transcend but include all the previous phases. You cannot transcend and say, wala na. All that is beyond me. Those phases before, I won't look at them anymore. No! You incorporate everything because you become inclusive as you grow in the spiritual life. You do not become exclusive. Inclusive. Everything finds a home in you. Now, kaya nga, the late Father Herman Joseph Esselman said, if you easily get scandalized, you are hardly a spiritual person. Why are you scandalized? Don't you see that what the person is doing, you can well do yourself? That you are capable of that same deed, or that same thought, or that same karumal-dumal na ginagawa niya? Yes, I'm not scandalized. I do not say I agree with it. But that person, I find is part of me. Because that person's doing, I am capable of myself. That is why the best confessors are those who have done their homework in themselves. General principle. Transcend, yes, but include all the previous stages. All the previous stages. The fifth is, is that the fourth? Fifth? Fifth, no? Okay. The fourth is, to truly move to the next, you have to integrate an earlier phase. Therefore, in the fifth is, yes, you can't have it all. You have to let go. This is where the rich young man comes in the third mansion. You cannot cling to all of it and still have it. Very, very surprisingly, as we move on, the simpler it becomes. No? And you will see that even prayer becomes so simple. Carmelite prayer is very, very simple. In fact, it is so simple, if you can breathe, you can pray the Carmelite way. So simple. So, something has to be let go of. You have to release something. Now the sixth, you cannot walk the second journey with first journey tools. No? So, we have to know more or less so that we will be able to use appropriate means to be able to face the challenges of where we are. Okay? So the music of the afternoon doesn't work in the morning. Now, the music of the morning is not relevant in the afternoon necessarily. Now, the seventh and the last, as one journeys, one begins to have a bigger picture of reality. One begins to come home, and one begins to truly let go. Now from here, I'd like to continue. So, you will see, my dear friends, that when how many things there, a golf club. This is the God we have.
Yes.
We honor Him by asking Him. We honor Him by believing He can do it. And this is the beautiful thing that He wants us to do. So here, you will see then that in number 6 of the first chapter of the first mansions, Saint Teresa would say, those here are like those who are paralyzed and crippled bodies. Later, he would even say, they are like deaf mutes because they hardly can hear the voice of the king at the center of the table. They hardly can respond to him. They cannot hear, they cannot reply. They are paralyzed. And then she says, well, because they are so involved in external matters that they do not see, they do not enter within themselves. So here, you see a very, very graphic picture which Saint Teresa wants us to see for certain. Now, here then, in the next number, the Saint Teresa says, the door of entry to this castle is prayer and reflection. Now, here, my Spanish professor put something in the Spanish text. He says, en España, para los cerdos, todo sirve. What does that mean? He says, in Spain, they use every part of the pig. Name a part of the pig that is not used by the Spaniards. Everything, including the hoofs, including the snout, everything is used in some kind of delicacy. And then he says, in prayer, everything is used. He says, en que todo sirve, como los cerdos. Like pigs, you can use every part. You do not get rid of any part. Mapakinabangan lahat yan. The same principle in prayer. That is why prayer includes everything. And later I will point out to you, even temptations, even things we are ashamed of, everything is used by God. Like a pig. Everything is used for hamon. You can use this part for salad. You can use this part for adobo. Everything is used. Nothing is wasted. This is the principle. Nothing is wasted. Therefore, no empty RCB for prayer. Do not censor it. Because everything can be used. Everything is valuable. So, when we look at this then, we can see then that in the first dwelling places, as we see the dignity of our souls, it ends in the first chapter by saying, good desires are necessary. Self-knowledge and awareness as well. This is in number 8 of the first chapter of the dwelling places, towards the middle. For even though they are very involved in the world, they have good desires. Napaka-importante po that we want this so that God can do it. Now, here I'd like then to look at a little more closely at how the ego self comes in these first 3 mansions. Now, when we look then at the ego self, it's good to remember the ego is not bad. The ego is not evil. What is bad is when it becomes the center of your life. We need to have ego to stand up. You need to have a strong ego to survive in Carmel. Kung mahina-hina ka lang, babay ka na. You laugh because I think you know what I mean. Kung mahina-hina lang ang ego mo, alam mo, durog ka. That goes for the friars, the nuns, and the OCDS. Now, let's put it in general. In the spiritual life, it's the same. You need to have a good, honest-to-goodness ego so that we are able to go on moving towards the center. Look at Saint Teresa. When you have a good ego, you have a good sense of self. You know what you want, what you stand for. You know your weaknesses, you know your strengths. This is a good, honest-to-goodness ego. This is an honest-to-goodness, stable ego. Look at Einstein. Sa tayo pa lang, kitang-kita mo na strong. Strong ego is different from big ego. So, if your ego, as I always say, is bigger than Mall of Asia, then we have problems. No? So, that is why, if you notice, in Carmelite spirituality, everything in Carmel, name it, will always encourage a collision with the ego. Everything. Structures, community life, collision with the ego. Why? Because the temptation for egocentricity is so much that the wisdom of our Carmelite life, the structure of our communities, our prayer times, even your monthly meetings, is made such that the egos collide. Salamat sa Diyos. You know why? Because then we rub on each other and hopefully the sharp edges become a little less sharp. Not all the time. Sometimes they become sharper. So here, that is why when you look at the structure of Carmelite spirituality, it encourages a confrontation with the ego. My ego. So when you confront the ego, it will not be a picnic. Because when the ego is confronted, naturalmente, alam naman yan, didefensa yan. Because the normal way the ego works is judgment. Normal yan. We are born judges. We always evaluate good or bad. We always evaluate sikat o hindi. We always evaluate okay at hindi. It's so natural to us. That is ego work. And that is why judgment is something that reveals to us the state of our ego. Now, here in the first three mansions, judgments galore. Judgments galore. Now, please, we judge ourselves as well. And we always find ourselves lacking, or we always compare ourselves with others. Now here, we see then what fear brings about. So, when there is fear, I have to compare. I have to compete. And I have to see that I have enough. So ang ego, ang mentality ng ego, ganito po, scarcity mentality. Ang mentality ng Diyos, abundance mentality. Huwag kang mag-hoard, marami pa yan. Marami pa yan. Some people say, Father, I'll photocopy your notes. Photocopy din. There is more from where it came from. Maubusan ba ako? Because this is ego at work. And if I have to protect this because you know what, if it spreads around,
wala na akong sasabihin.
Very good. Spread the news. This Father, I will tape this. You tape it. No problem. So here, you will begin to see that the ego always functions from a scarcity mode. Kaya nga, I have to protect myself. I have to protect my interest. Mauna na ako, baka maubusan ako. This is ego mentality. Ego work. Now, this is something which is in itself very human. That is why, although we are beautiful, as Saint Teresa says, and we have marvelous capacities, we are mixed blessings. We are not pure blessings. Although remember, original blessing came before original sin. Ang original po sa atin, hindi ang kasalanan. Ang original sa atin na mapalad tayo, na blessed tayo. That we have to remember. But somehow in our catechism of the past, what was more put into our heads was original sin, original sin, original sin. No! Before original sin, we were originally blessed. Like a young man coming to me asking me how struggling with his feelings of lust can be a blessing. And I said, what did God say on the sixth day? After He created the heavens and the earth. What did He say? He said that it was very good. You mean God was lying? There's nothing very good there? And He said, what can be good about lust? I said, look, that is only one way you are using sexuality. There are many ways to express sexuality. Not only physical, in loving and caring for people, in being compassionate. Therefore, do not limit it to sex. Because what we are looking at is sexuality. Sex is what you do. Sexuality is who you are. And we separate it. Just like people who do not see in a new way, we separate it. It's one. We are sexual beings. You sit like a woman. I stand like a man. You eat like a woman. I write like a man. That is sexuality. This then is very good. Everything we do is according to masculinity or femininity. So here, we begin to see that we are mixed blessings. Mixed blessings. So, that is why we can see then that we have to maybe make a little reflection on how the ego features in the first three mansions. So, you will see that those who live in the first three mansions are doing ego work. So you will see here that in the first dwelling places, Saint Teresa calls the darkness tiniebla. Tiniebla is a kind of sinister darkness. That is at the end of number 1 of chapter 2. She says the devil who is darkness himself. Tiniebla, no? So you will see here that we have then, in the sight of all this, to develop one important trait, which is Teresian humility. Now let me read that from number 9, chapter 2 of the first dwelling places. That is number 9. Chapter 2 of the first dwelling places. While we are on this earth, nothing is more important to us than humility. So I repeat, it is good, indeed very good, to try to enter first into the room where self-knowledge is dealt with, rather than fly off to other rooms. Then she continues, this is the right road. And if we can journey along a safe and level path, why should we want to fly? Rather, let's strive to make more progress in self-knowledge. In my opinion, we shall never completely know ourselves if we don't strive to know God. By gazing at His splendor, we get in touch with our lowliness. Naku po, that is vital. We can only know us through the eyes of God. We can only understand who we are. We have to look through the eyes of God. Only the way God looks at us, it comes gradually, as we said this morning. That is why revolutions fail. Because many times, we are overly zealous for reforms, overly zealous for taking care of ourselves, but then we need less reformation and more transformation. Because the persons themselves who want to live right are not themselves transformed. So, here to discover an answer, as we move in the mansions, we have to learn how to wait and to observe. Two things which are very difficult for people of our time: waiting and observing. I notice that in most of us, patience, not only discernment, is a very rare commodity. Patience is a practice of wisdom. Because we do not insist on our time. We respect God's timing. Patience many times is like that. Now, so, that is why Saint Teresa puts it very clearly here. As you fix your eyes on Christ, as you learn about yourself, you will need to look at Him. What's look at Him? You will need to pray. Now why? At prayer, we wait in silence. As you grow in prayer, you begin to discover moments of silence are longer. You notice also with people who are in relationships, the longer that you have related with one another, the silences become more comfortable. Silence is no longer threatening. Now, that is why when we pray, leave room to be quiet. Leave room just to sit. Because when you are sitting down, the ego will be screaming underneath. What do I mean? When you wait in silence, our patterns assault us. Do you notice when you pray, you begin to see patterns in you? Patterns of anger, patterns of control, experiences of the past come back with a vengeance, and they begin to surface. I don't know. I think you know what I'm talking about. Do you notice when we pray, we sometimes question whether we are really praying because we end up confronting all these demons inside us? They come up. They come up. And we say, I am no longer praying. No, you are praying. That's particular why we are praying. That's particularly why there is the priority of contemplation in the mansions. Because when you pray, the shadow comes up. The shadow, according to Carl Jung, is that part of me I do not want to accept. The part of me I do not want others to see. The part of me I do not want to admit that is mine. It comes up and asks for your attention. It is not easy. That is why to persevere in a prayer like that is not easy. From the beginning, Saint Teresa says, determinación, meaning, do not judge yourself, I am not praying. You see how automatically we judge ourselves? You are. And I noticed that, personally, I was talking to one of you, the Hill has been a blessing for us the last 3 years. We have been very active friars in many, many posts. We are placed in this blessed place where there is so much quiet. No malls. No Starbucks. We do not have Jollibee just around the corner. We don't have SM Cinema nearby. It's quite a distance. Very quiet. Thanks be to God. And you know what? In that silence, aakyat sila lahat. They ask to be recognized in the presence of Christ. This is what happens as you go deeper. And you will say, no, I'm no longer praying. You are. God is bringing them up to be conscious so that you are going to identify them and you desire, Lord, touch this memory. Touch this anger. Touch this sloth, whatever it is. Touch this greed. And then begins a true interiorization. Now that is why in Carmel, silence is not punishment. Silence is gold. Because in that quiet, the bridegroom comes. In the silence, he comes. He brings up from within the parts of you you have not wanted to see. That is why, as I said, kung hindi ka lang medyo matapang-tapang, uma-assign ka dito, lalabas lahat sila. All of them come out to be recognized. Every day you look at them in the eye. And when you think you are finished with all of them, another one comes up. So, liberating, beautiful. But that's what happens. That is why silence is such an important part of karma. When you have learned solitude and you have rejoiced in silence, I think very good, something very good is happening. Because we live in a very noisy culture. Don't get me wrong, I'm as extrovert as can be. That is why this is good for me. Because here, I have to befriend my introversion. Here, I have to go in. I am forced to go in. Thanks be to God. Later on, I will talk to you why about the phases of life. Because if I do not go in now, kawawa ako as I get older. I will become more eccentric, more uncentered. So good, thanks be to God, that at this time in my life, I'm here. Because it has made me want to enter. I said want, I'm not saying I'm inside. I want to enter and to be able to befriend the parts of me, the ego also. So, that is why you will see that many times in Carmelite prayer, we are doing only two things. We are waiting and we are observing. Not even talking. Not even thinking. Not even making beautiful resolutions. Mainly waiting. Because waiting is the stance of the poor. Only the poor wait. If I have the means, I don't have to wait. I can rush the process. But here, I am forced to wait in prayer. And it comes up. Later on, we will see in the third mansions a beautiful image that Saint Teresa puts. When all this come up, she says, as long as you have the ointment of humility, the Lord who is the surgeon will come to heal us. Chapter 2 of the third mansions. You see? As long as you have the ointment of humility. Can you not humble yourself when you see all of them coming up? When you see all of them asking for your attention, asking you to acknowledge them, asking you to accept them as parts of you, you will feel humble. You will say, my God, I have no reason to boast. Then what happens is, the Lord who is the surgeon, El Cirujano in the Spanish, will come and heal us. No? So here, that is why when we are, you notice when Jesus is led to the wilderness in Mark 1:13, what does Saint Mark say? Who are the first things that show up when Jesus is in the desert? It says here, the wild beasts. Read Mark 1:13. Because when you come to silence, the first things that come up are your wild beasts. That is why some people will tell me, Father, after all this silence, I never realized what an angry person I am. I never realized that. And all of this has brought it up. And it's time to observe. You wait, you observe. No? Any questions before I continue? So that is why
When you go into the desert, the silence of the desert, you will see that a parade of voices will come up. You will see patterns in your own life, addictions if you want to call them, ego trips if you want to call them, and it is a humiliating experience. The first voices we hear are normally negative. And then you will begin to see that there in that milieu, God begins to reveal Himself. So, this is what true prayer does. As we go through the first dwelling places, you will see that in all of this, the action of the devil is this. In number 17 of the last chapter of the first dwelling places, Saint Teresa writes, what the devil is hereby aiming after is no small thing. The cooling of the charity and love the sisters have for one another. And this, she says, the true perfection consists in love of God and neighbor. The more perfectly we keep these two commandments, the more perfect we will be. So in other words, prayer is all about relationships. Growing in relationships with God, with others, and with self. This is the aim of prayer. Now, therefore, when we begin to see this is when, during prayer, we do what we call shadow work. Shadow work because Carl Jung would say, the psychoanalyst, the ego, the shadow. The shadow is the part of me I do not accept. The shadow is the part of me I do not want to show to other people. Naku, kung malaman lang nila to, I hide it. The shadow is the part of me I refuse to look at. This part comes up during prayer. And when it comes up during prayer, that is when we need to wait and to observe. And here, during the first mention, you will see that it is not yet very clear to the person. Kasi po, many times the person does not know it is the shadow. This is worse. How do you know it is your shadow that is showing itself? How do you know? Very easy. Again, overacting. How? When you are irritated very much by a person, very much, chances are your shadow is there. It's showing itself. So when a person irritates you too much, intensely, magtanong ka, is it about her or about you? Anything that irritates us too much is usually a little glimpse into your shadow. Kaya nga, because you do not accept it, when you see it in others, kalalabanin mo yan. Kasi, that part of her, you have not accepted in you. That is why, when you have accepted yourself, yung shadow mo, you begin to be more maawain. Now, for example, when a person has done shadow work with himself, a person who has the same weakness as him will be treated with compassion. Because the person has done his homework. Kinakaibigan na niya yung part na ayaw niya. Nakita niya sa isang tao. Because the person has accepted this part, the person can be more accepting of that person. So when the person is very, very marahas, very malupit about a certain person, you ask, bakit kaya? Baka may nakita siya. May nakita siya sa tao niya that reminds her of herself. Baliktarin po natin. When you are also very attracted to a person, intense attraction, then you will say, bakit kaya? Anong nakita mo? Is there something there that you want to have also? So, you will see, ang dami pong mga connections that can be made. So, here you see, in the first mansions, these are the most peripheral of the mansions. Many times, the person is not even aware, shadow niya pala. So, i-justify niya, galit ako sa kanya dahil chismosa siya. Galit ako sa kanya dahil walang awa siya. Galit ako sa kanya dahil napaka-inefficient niya. Not even knowing that the intensity of the anger or the irritation is the shadow showing itself. Hindi niya alam. Many times, this is first mansion, ego work. So, blaming. Ikaw kasi, you were the one who started it all. You're the one at fault. It's never both of us are at fault. Very first mansion experience of the ego work. No? Okay. Now, any questions? Am I making sense?
Yes.
Okay. Because please ask, because I might be presuming that I'm using terms which are understandable. No? Okay. Now, this then is what brings us to the second mansions. When we look then at the first, a person realizing, I am called and I belong to God. Basic conversion po ang nangyayari sa first mansion. So I will say, tama na yung paglalasing ko. I think I need to look at this seriously, and finally I want to start some kind of spiritual life. That's first mansion. The universal call to live in communion with God. Having been created in His image. I'll give you copies of this, don't worry. So, this is the first step in the following of Christ. Now, the first step, universal call. Nothing in particular. The second step, the second mansion, would do with a personal call now. A personal invitation to come to Him, to know Him, to stay with Him, and to be sent. That is why, in the first mansions, a biblical reference is Genesis. You are made in my image and likeness. You are beautiful, and your capacity is tremendous. Second mansions, you will go now to the call of the apostles in the Gospels. Ngayon, particular na ang calling. Ikaw, yesterday, St. James, I will call you. So here, the biblical references are from the Gospels, wherein Jesus calls the apostles where they are, as they are. Matthew, at the tax collector's post. Peter and Andrew, by the Sea of Galilee. Nathanael, under the fig tree. This is second mansion. Meaning, there is now a particular invitation to you, particularly you, to follow me. So here you will see the call of Jesus in the second mansions. So, when we begin to hear the call of Jesus in the second mansions, there we begin to see that, interestingly, there is only one chapter in the second mansions. And the chapter can be summarized in a phrase. Embrace your cross. That's it. Meaning, when you enter the second mansions, you will have to do your homework, boy. You will have to do your homework, girl. Now, you see the ego now at work? Now, begin ego work. Begin to work with that. Begin to see what you have. Begin to allow the Lord to help you to do the task. Because St. Teresa says, in the second mansions, I said there's only one chapter. In number 2, they have begun to practice prayer. And they have understood how important it is not to stay in the dwelling places, the first ones. That is why I said this morning, it is dangerous to stay too long on the fringes. Because sooner or later, doing the balancing act on the wall, you will fall over and begin to play with the crocodiles, and you will be swimming there with the serpents in the moat. Saint Teresa would give the beautiful image. No? So that is why first mention, Father, sin or no sin? First mention yan. That should not be the question na matagal. It should be, Father, better or less? Then you have growth. Father, kasalanan ba? Napaka-first mention na tanong yan. Kasalanan hindi. Ay, para kang gumagano ba? Nagbabalancing act, no? Before you know it, you tip over to the other side. It is, Father, is this better or this is best? So it's no longer a question of good or evil, no more. It's better or best. That is the beginning of the second mention. I begin to be more and more conscious of doing what is better. Not only good, better. If possible, what is best. So that is why Saint Teresa writes here that the people at this stage are not too careful about the occasions of sin. And that is why the chances of falling back are very strong. No? Very strong. And so she tells us, among the temptations in these mansions is that the devil presents worldly pleasures as if they were eternal. As if they were so attractive. And so if we are not very discerning, we can be fooled by it. No? So, and here we begin to see what that will do. No? So, that is why the ego self needs to be worked on so that we will be able to see ourselves less and less working from the ego, more and more working from our deeper selves, our truer selves. No? So, that is why when we, for example, the need to be right. The need to be right can be very strong. The need to be right is not evil in itself. But unfortunately, we want to be right at the expense of other people or to prove other people wrong. So, you will see that no wonder Jesus tells us to let go of judgment. Now, does it mean we do not assess? No. When I say judgment, let go of putting people in boxes. Let go of classifying experiences as good or bad. We have to be more careful. That is why Jesus tells us, do not judge, and you will not be judged. Now, unfortunately, we have been brought up in a way na natatakot tayo sa Diyos in the wrong sense. Bakit? This is why one of my friends said, the Catholicism that was brought to the Philippines, in his opinion, was not the true Catholicism, but was Jansenism. Jansenism is the heresy that portrayed God as a God who would punish, a God who was ready to plunge into hell anyone who had wrongdoing. This was the heresy during the time of Teresa, and which her little way was addressing. How is this shown? Hindi po ba, who would like to come close to this kind of a God? When you seek intimacy with God, you are going to suffer. We believe that. We believe that. So why should I come before this God? I know I will suffer. Now, this is Jansenism. Therefore, if I come close to God, too close to Him, He will make me suffer. So why would I want to come close to Him? Second, when I seek intimacy with God, if I commit one fault, which I consider mortal, He will send me to hell. If I miss one Sunday Mass and I die at that moment, I will say hello to the other side. And people believe it. That is why some people become very, very scrupulous about missing one Sunday Mass. And I say, have you been attending Mass regularly? Yes, Father. Just this Sunday wala. Then I don't see why you should become too excited about it. Lalo na, Father, I was traveling. Of course, God would not expect something you couldn't do. Or my sister, my wife was sick. Of course. But we do not look at it that way. Third, those whom God loves die young. I'd like to live longer, so Lord, don't love me too much. These are Johnson's statements. No? So, in other words, those of us who are older are not loved so much by God. So, but it's ridiculous. No? Now, so, when we look at all these statements, unconsciously we conduct ourselves by them. These are our guiding principles without our being conscious. Now, when this happens, we judge. We judge, and we are afraid to go to hell. We are hell-oriented. Rather than heaven-oriented, for goodness sake, let's go to heaven. Or worse, not heaven, we are purgatory-centered. After my death, I will spend many years in purgatory. I will fry there in the fire. Please. No? Now look, why are we thinking of purgatory when we can go to heaven direct? No transit. Direct flight. That is why, when I ask people to feel their inner authority is the sense. I ask people, do you believe God dwells in you? Yes, Father. Okay, good. Do you believe that God speaks in you? Yes, Father. Now, be aware of God speaking in you. And then I ask, do you believe God loves you? Yes, Father. And I will say, give me a number. What do you mean, Father? You know, something that you have to gauge, because we are human. We have to know if something is strong enough or not. 10 is the highest. 1 is the smallest or the weakest. Feel it. God loves me. What number do you get? 9, Father. Good. Feel it again and ask yourself, after my death, I will go to heaven. No, Father, no, cannot be. And why? Doesn't God love you? Oh, yes, Father. Then you see a contradiction. Now, this is what the mystics discover. That God is not the God we thought He was. And so that is why very few enter the mystical life, because we are stuck in the three mansions. Our way of looking at God through our ego. And we reduce God. We return the favor. We create Him in our image and likeness. So we return the favor. No? So we create Him like us. Here is the big joke. What has happened? Now, this is why we are able to see then that as we grow, we will see that there are some things that we have to let go of. So I say, are you sure you will go to heaven? How many people can say yes? Why? Because God loves me. I know I'm weak. I know I can never make the grade, but He loves me. That is why personally I believe all of us will end up in heaven. I believe that. I believe that very much. In fact, when we get there, you will be surprised who your neighbors will be.
And many times, some of us might say, how did you get it? Judgment even in heaven. Because when you look at the mistakes, they were union-centered, not sin-centered. What has happened with our Christianity, it has become sin management. It's all about sin. Sin management. Napaka-Jansenist po. That is why my priest friend who shared this said, we were baptized Catholics but brought up Jansenists. The corrective is the mystical life. That is why when you look at the mystics, they were so free. And when you look at the mystics, they knew heaven was theirs. Despite the fact that they knew how weak they were. No? Okay. Questions? So, when you look at the second mansions, you will see that perseverance again is stressed by Saint Teresa. You will see this in number 3. She will say, this perseverance is most necessary here, and one always gains much through perseverance. Imagine, in 2 sentences, she repeats it. Perseverance is needed, most necessary here. One always gains much through perseverance. But the attacks made by devils in 1,000 ways afflict the soul more in these rooms than in the previous ones. So, when Ignatius of Loyola was asked, are you a sinner? Ignatius said, yes, I am a loved sinner. That is a mystical reply. Mystical because I am not emphasizing one over another. I am holding the two together. I am sinner, yes, but I am loved. Are you saved? Bakit tayo natataranta when the born again come to us? Are you saved? Yes! I am saved. And I am in the process of being saved. I am a work in progress. Yes, I'm saved. Of course. No? Now look at this. The certitude that comes from the mystical life. So that is why when we look at it this way, we begin to see more things come into focus. Now, here then, you will see that perseverance, determination, paulit-ulit, strong determination in number 6 of that chapter. Towards the maybe 6 sentences down, you will see determination is repeated. And in number 7, St. Teresa says, please don't be thinking about consolations here. Think about just continuing. No? Okay. Now, here in the end of number 7, St. Teresa says, embrace the cross your spouse has carried and understand that this must be your task. What is the cross that has to be embraced? What is the death that we have to undergo? Working on what we have to look at. That is your ego work. That is your soul work. This needs to be done. That's why when you say embrace the cross, please do not manufacture crosses. Because manufactured crosses are fake.
Fake.
The crosses the Lord gives are tailor-made already. They are already embedded in your DNA. They are already hardwired in your neurons. They are already there in your state of life, in your temperament. You don't need to invent the cross. That is what you have to embrace. And you know what you embrace? You end up embracing the cross. Embracing you. All of you. Not only the wheat, also the weeds. You end up embracing, accepting yourself. Remember, you cannot give what you don't have. If you have not done your homework with yourself, how can you relate to others in a profound way?
If you have not accepted yourself, how can you be accepting of others? If you have not forgiven yourself, how can you forgive other people? Cannot be. Charity begins at home, but does not end there. That is why from here, go out. No? So when you look at the second mansions, you see perseverance, continue. That's the gist of it. No? One chapter lang, because you can sum it up in one. Embrace the cross. Don't run away from it. Don't run away from the cross. Okay. So, here you begin to see that Saint Teresa puts it beautifully in number 8 of the second dwelling places. 4 times she repeats conformity to God's will in one paragraph. So you see here, number 8 of the second dwelling places. It starts with the whole aim. Allow me to read it. Number 8 of the second dwelling places. The whole aim of any person who is beginning prayer, and don't forget this because it's very important. Like my teacher, when you know it will come out in the exam, she will say that, don't forget this now. This is very important. Very much a teacher. Saint Teresa says, should be that she worked and prepared herself with determination and every possible effort to bring her will into conformity with God's will. That's not enough. Then she repeats, be certain, as I shall say later, the greatest perfection attainable along the spiritual life lies in this conformity. And that's not enough. She adds, it is the person who lives in more perfect conformity who will receive more from the Lord and be more advanced on this road. And not contented, the 4th time, don't think that in what concerns perfection, there is some mystery or things unknown or still to be understood. For in perfect conformity to God's will lies our good. Now, wow. 4 times in as many lines. Therefore, it's very important. In the second mentions, want what God wants. Easier said than done, I know. No? Now, in number 9, she puts, now don't discourage if you fail. She says, even from this fall, God will draw out good. That is very consoling. Even from this fall, God will draw out good. Therefore, she tells us, it is important that you have peace in your own house. That is second paragraph of number 9. Peace in your own house. Now, where is your house?
Peace in
your house is here. That there is peace in your own house.
Very good.
Remember in the dark night, St. John of the Cross says, my soul, my house being now at rest. Because when your house has no peace, you cannot pray. What do you mean by peace? Na you are going on the right track. No? You are not going away from the center. You are not going away from the center. So, you will see then that as we enter into the third mansions will now be the biblical reference from Mark 10, the rich young man. So you remember, in the first mansions, it was general. A general call to live for God. Genesis, I am made in the image and likeness of God. Second mansion, now it's more particular. The call of Jesus to particular persons. Personal invitation to follow Him. And the example that we gave, the call of the individual apostles in the Gospels. Now, we find that the rich young man is being placed as a model for ourselves in the third mansion. The rich young man, the response of the disciples to follow Jesus, now, not only in a good way, but in the better way. A better way. But as we know, it will be something that is lacking in him. No? So, you will see that these moments in the following of Christ have biblical references. No? Now, that is why you will see that there are certain tasks that need to be done at certain areas of our life. No? And that is why you will see that Carl Jung describes this as the two halves of life. I don't think anybody here is below 40.
Tanda na tayo lahat.
Okay. When I talk about halves of life, they are not necessarily chronological. They may be chronological, but they also mean the first half of life, Carl Jung says, operates on a certain mode. The second half of life operates on its own mode. I would like to adapt this to Saint Teresa. The first half of the journey is the first 3 mansions. The second half of the journey is the last 4 mansions. Now, when you look at the first half of life, it is what I would like to call the old wine. New wine, new skins. Hindi po ba? Because if new wine is put in old skins, the skins will burst and the wine is wasted. If you have new wine, you change the containers. And here, there is a beautiful parallel that you see between the first half of life, according to Jung, and what Saint Teresa would call the first 3 mansions. Ego world. Why? Because the task of the first half of life, according to Carl Jung, is to create a container for myself. Is to create a receptacle for myself. That is why during the first half of life, usually when we are younger, we are very conscious about how we look. Because it is at that time of our life that we are building our identity according to our containers. It's the time that we want to make a good impression. It's the time of our life we want to be successful, sometimes at any cost. It is the time of our life we want to achieve. Yun po ang first half of life. The second half of life is not too much concerned about the container anymore. You are concerned about the contents of the container. So as you go to the second half of the mansions, you begin to go in. You begin to look at the contents of the container. That is why when a person is already quite old and still very fastidious about their looks, to the point of becoming ridiculous, the person is using the wrong tools because the person is supposed to be beyond certain things. Now, I'm not saying that we do not take care of ourselves. We should. But when we see people desperate to keep looking young at any expense, and they are clearly beyond the midpoint, you begin to question, oh dear, here is somebody stuck in the first half of life. Or when you see an older person still so hungry for power, then you begin to see, what's happening here? She is not doing her homework. This is the task of somebody younger. And this person is supposed to be at that stage when the person is more content about letting go than grabbing. Then you begin to ask, well, is this person using the right tools? That is why, as we grow, when we are younger, we believe beauty is outside. As we grow older, we begin to see beauty steals in one. Beauty is now inside. I'm not saying we don't remain beautiful outside, but now the emphasis is no longer the container, The emphasis is the contents of the container. The contents. So, we can go through that tomorrow. So, the metaphors that we look are this. First half of life, beginner.